At 76 years old, Art Carney finally spoke the words that stunned lifelong fans of the Honeymooners. For decades, people believed the chemistry between Ralph Kramden and Ed Norton was effortless, the kind of magic television could never fake. But Carney admitted that behind the laughter he was close to walking away forever. The reason was Jackie Gleason. Gleason was larger than life on screen, but behind the curtain he was unpredictable, explosive, and impossible to work with. His refusal to rehearse, his drinking, and his temper created constant chaos. Carney, a man who thrived on preparation, nearly reached his breaking point. The shocking truth he revealed later in life changed how fans viewed the beloved sitcom. How could the show survive when its stars were on the verge of tearing each other apart? Television in the early 1950s was still finding its identity. Families gathered around small black-and-white screens, hungry for programs that could make them laugh and forget the stresses of post-war America. Out of that moment came Jackie Gleason, a comedian with an unmatched sense of timing and a charisma that filled any room he walked into. Gleason was already becoming a household name when he created the sketch that would eventually evolve into The Honeymooners. At first, it wasn't a full series. It appeared as a recurring skit on The Jackie Gleason Show, where the rough-around-the-edges bus driver, Ralph Kramden, clashed and connected with his lovable neighbor, Ed Norton. The audience immediately responded. They saw themselves in those working-class frustrations, the small apartments, the dreams of making it big, and the endless arguments between husbands and wives that always circled back to love. Casting Art Carney as Ed Norton was a stroke of genius. Carney brought warmth, physical comedy, and a unique rhythm to the role. His Norton wasn't just a sidekick. He was an equal force, a foil who kept Gleason's Ralph from tipping too far into cruelty. Viewers adored the balance. Gleason was the bluster. Carney was the heart. Together they created something no producer could manufacture: genuine on-screen magic. By the time The Honeymooners spun off into its own half-hour sitcom in 1955, anticipation was sky-high. People tuned in week after week, and for a brief moment it seemed unstoppable. Critics praised the sharp writing, audiences quoted the lines, and Ralph and Norton became cultural icons. To the outside world, it looked like a perfect match between two men destined to work side by side. But while the laughter echoed in living rooms across America, backstage, the cracks were already forming. Gleason's brilliance came with chaos, and Carney, despite his cheerful performance, was already starting to feel the strain. The world saw comedy history in the making, but for Carney, the seeds of conflict were quietly being planted, and soon, the very qualities that made Gleason so electric on screen would make him nearly impossible to survive off-screen. To understand why Art Carney nearly walked away from The Honeymooners, you first have to understand Jackie Gleason. On screen, he was magnetic, quick-witted, and larger than life, the life of the party in every sense. But off-screen, he was something entirely different. Gleason was a storm, unpredictable and uncontainable, with a reputation that mixed brilliance and volatility in equal measure. He was both a comic genius and a tyrant, depending on the day. One of Gleason's gifts was his extraordinary memory. He could glance at a script and remember every word, every beat, and every cue. It was a talent that should have been an asset. But in practice, it fueled his arrogance about preparation. While most actors relied on rehearsal to polish their delivery, Gleason considered rehearsal a waste of time. He believed comedy lived in the moment, that true laughter came from spontaneity, not practice. And because he was the star, he demanded that the rest of the cast follow his lead. For Art Carney, this was pure torture. Carney was a craftsman, the kind of actor who thrived on rhythm, timing, and careful preparation. He studied scripts, analyzed beats, and believed that structure was what allowed humor to shine. Gleason's chaotic methods stripped him of that security. Instead of steady preparation, Carney was forced into a constant state of improvisation. Every day felt like walking into a performance blindfolded, hoping he could keep up with whatever Gleason decided to throw his way. Gleason's habits outside of performance only made things worse. He was infamous for showing up late to set, often after long nights of heavy drinking and gambling. Crew members whispered about his temper and how easily he would snap when something didn't go his way. Writers feared him, knowing he might toss out an entire script at the last minute. Producers learned not to argue, and even directors, who normally controlled the flow of a show, found themselves sidelined. Gleason was the star, and what Gleason wanted, Gleason got. Stories of his behavior became legendary. Tales of him disappearing for hours in the middle of a production day, leaving the cast waiting, only to return with a new grand idea that everyone else had to adjust to immediately. There were times when he would rewrite scenes on the spot, ignoring the careful work of writers who had labored for weeks. One moment he was generous and funny, buying drinks for the crew, and the next he was a hurricane of rage, lashing out at anyone in his path. The bigger his fame grew, the shorter his temper became. Networks and sponsors tolerated it all because Gleason was a ratings machine. For Carney, however, the burden was crushing. To match Gleason's energy on camera, he had to abandon his natural instincts. Lines that should have been carefully rehearsed were thrown out on the fly. Scenes veered into improvisation, demanding Carney react instantly without the safety net of preparation. The audience adored the results, laughing at the energy and praising the authenticity. But Carney felt himself shrinking under the pressure. He could never predict which Gleason he would encounter each day, the charming performer who made him laugh or the tyrant who made him feel small. To the fans, the comedy looked effortless. To Carney, it was built on exhaustion, frustration, and nerves stretched thin. He never complained publicly during those years. He smiled for cameras, played his part, and carried the image of Ed Norton with grace. But inside, the unpredictability was eating away at him. Every day on set was another reminder that he was trapped in a partnership that might destroy him. The clash of styles soon pushed him to the edge of walking away from the show that had made him famous. Carney was not a man who craved the spotlight. Unlike Jackie Gleason, who fed off the roar of the audience, Carney was quiet, methodical, and happiest when he could prepare and deliver his work with precision. That difference in temperament turned every filming week into a trial. Gleason insisted that rehearsals drained the humor out of the material, while Carney believed that practice created confidence. Being forced to wing it in front of millions made him anxious and resentful. The pressure was relentless. Gleason's sudden script changes, his drinking-fueled unpredictability, and his outbursts left Carney feeling cornered. Crew members later remembered how Carney would retreat backstage, smoking nervously and muttering that he couldn't keep doing this forever. His wife at the time admitted that he would come home drained, often questioning whether he should just walk away. Carney's own standards made the situation worse. He hated delivering a sloppy performance, but Gleason's style left him no choice but to adapt on the fly. For a perfectionist, that felt like torture. He knew the audience was laughing, but he felt his craft was being undermined. The man praised for his physical comedy, impeccable timing, and subtle delivery was being reduced to surviving Gleason's chaos. The breaking point came during the show's most demanding stretches, when filming and live appearances piled on top of each other. Carney confided to friends that he was ready to hand in his notice. He didn't care about the fame or the pay. The stress of working under Gleason's iron grip had become unbearable. Yet, despite standing on the edge of quitting, Carney stayed. Something pulled him back each time he was ready to walk away, and it wasn't loyalty to Gleason. It was something far more complicated. Walking away from. The Honeymooners would have been easy in theory. But in practice, Carney knew the stakes were far higher than just leaving a job. By the mid-1950s, the show was a national obsession. Viewers tuned in religiously, quoting lines in offices, schools, and living rooms across the country. Carney was no longer just another working actor. He had become Ed Norton, a character people loved almost as much as Gleason's Ralph Cramden. Stepping away would have meant not only risking his career, but also disappointing millions of fans who adored him. There was also the matter of money. Television in those days wasn't as lucrative as it would become later. But being on a hit program brought steady paychecks, sponsorship deals, and opportunities that Carney might never see again. For a man who had struggled for years to make a living in show business, walking away from that kind of security was terrifying. But it wasn't just about fame or financial comfort. In his own quiet way, Carney respected Gleason's talent. He may have despised the unpredictability, but he recognized genius when he saw it. Gleason could hold an audience in the palm of his hand, and Carney knew that working alongside him, no matter how painful, was cementing both of their names in television history. Even at his most frustrated, Carney later admitted there were nights when Gleason's timing left him in awe. Carney also cared deeply for the rest of the cast and crew. Audrey Meadows, who played Alice Cramden, often acted as a calming presence on set. Joyce Randolph, who played Trixie, remembered Carney as a professional who tried to shield others from Gleason's explosions. His loyalty to them made it even harder to walk away. Quitting would not just have affected Art Carney's life, but everyone else's on the show as well. So he endured. He swallowed his frustration, laughed on cue, and played Ed Norton with a warmth that made audiences believe the friendship between Ralph and Norton was unshakable. Behind that laughter, however, the personal cost was mounting. The decision to stay may have saved his career, but it came with consequences that would haunt him for years. Soon, those consequences began to spill into his personal life in ways fans never saw coming. To the millions watching at home, Art Carney seemed like the luckiest man alive. He had steady work, national fame, and the admiration of fans who saw him as the lovable neighbor everyone wished they had. But away from the spotlight, the strain of working with Jackie Gleason was leaving permanent scars. Carney had always struggled with insecurity. He never carried himself like a star and often doubted whether he belonged in the industry at all. Gleason's bullying presence magnified those doubts. Being forced to perform without rehearsal chipped away at his confidence. Every time Gleason showed up late, shouted at crew members, or tossed out the script at the last minute, Carney's anxiety climbed higher. The laughter from the audience didn't soothe him. It only deepened the pressure to keep performing under unbearable circumstances. Those stresses followed him home. His first marriage began to suffer as he returned from work exhausted, irritable, and emotionally drained. Friends recalled how Carney often used humor as a mask, cracking jokes to hide the frustration that was eating at him. Behind closed doors, he leaned increasingly on alcohol to calm his nerves. What began as a way to take the edge off soon became a dangerous crutch. The more the public adored Ed Norton, the more Carney felt himself slipping away from his own identity. He was trapped between being the audience's favorite sidekick and being a man quietly unraveling under the weight of Gleason's dominance. Depression set in, compounded by the feeling that he could never truly escape the shadow of his co-star. By the 1960s, after The Honeymooners had ended its original run, Carney's private struggles were impossible to ignore. He battled health issues, underwent treatment for alcohol dependency, and tried to rebuild relationships damaged by years of tension. Yet, despite it all, he rarely spoke publicly about how toxic his time with Gleason had been. His silence protected the show's legacy, but it also meant Carney carried the burden alone. It wasn't until decades later, well into his 70s, that he finally told the world just how close he had come to walking away from it all. For decades after The Honeymooners ended, Carney guarded the truth like a fragile secret. In interviews, he was polite, generous, and deferential. He praised Jackie Gleason's comedic genius, gave credit to the writers, and always highlighted the chemistry that made audiences fall in love with Ralph and Norton. To the public, he painted a picture of harmony and mutual respect. That silence was deliberate. Carney understood that fans wanted to believe in the magic they saw on their screens, and he was unwilling to tarnish that illusion while the memory was still fresh. Journalists often asked about his relationship with Gleason, and his answers rarely strayed from the safe script. He would call Gleason larger than life, talk about the thrill of performing before a live audience, and avoid mentioning the tension, the shouting, or the exhaustion he carried home after every chaotic taping. To the outside world, he was the loyal sidekick who adored his co-star. To Carney himself, it was a mask he wore for survival, but when he reached 76, something changed. Perhaps it was the clarity that comes with time, or the freedom of no longer needing to protect reputations. Whatever the reason, Carney finally spoke honestly about what those years had truly been like, and what he revealed stunned even his most devoted admirers. He admitted that working with Gleason had nearly broken him. The heavy drinking, the refusal to rehearse, the unpredictable temper, it all turned the set into a place of dread rather than joy. He confessed that he had been dangerously close to quitting altogether, ready to give up the role of Ed Norton despite the success, the money, and the adoration it brought him. For a man who had spent decades carefully shielding the truth, it was a startlingly raw confession. What shocked fans most wasn't just the difficulty of Gleason's behavior, but the chasm between perception and reality. Viewers had long assumed that the warmth between Ralph and Norton reflected the bond between Gleason and Carney themselves. The laughter, the shoulder slaps, the easy timing, it all seemed too natural to be anything but real. But Carney made it clear that their friendship existed only under the stage lights. Off-screen, they rarely connected. Their partnership was one of necessity, not affection. He respected Gleason's brilliance, but he never forgot how unbearable the man could be to work with. Carney also revealed that his decision to stay had little to do with loyalty. It was driven by fear. Fear of losing his livelihood, fear of disappointing audiences who saw him as part of their family, and fear of walking away from a role that had come to define his entire career. That honesty hit fans hard. The man they had always seen as steady and unshakable admitted that he had been driven by doubt and insecurity, just like anyone else. For the first time, the audience saw the price behind the laughter. His late-life honesty reframed the Honeymooners forever. What once looked like perfect comedic timing was, in truth, often fueled by frustration, improvisation, and survival instincts. The tension between Ralph and Norton on screen mirrored the real tension between Gleason and Carney off-screen. That raw energy may have made the show feel authentic, but it also left Carney drained and scarred. Yet even as he revealed these truths, Carney never tried to destroy the show's legacy. He acknowledged the brilliance of what they had created together and understood that despite the pain, the final product had brought joy to millions. By finally lifting the curtain, he allowed fans to see the human cost of greatness without stripping away the magic itself. And in doing so, he defined the most complicated part of their legacy, a legacy built on laughter, but haunted by the price of creating it. The revelation didn't erase what Art Carney and Jackie Gleason achieved together. If anything, it deepened the respect for what they managed to pull off under such intense pressure. The Honeymooners may have only aired for 39 episodes in its original run, but those episodes became some of the most replayed and beloved in television history. Syndication introduced new generations to Ralph Cramden and Ed Norton, and catchphrases like, "To the moon, Alice," became woven into American culture. Fans were stunned to learn that the laughter they cherished was born out of tension, but many felt that revelation explained why the comedy had always felt so real. The sharp edges in Ralph and Norton's banter reflected the genuine friction between Gleason and Carney. What seemed like perfect timing was, in many cases, the result of Carney scrambling to keep up with Gleason's unpredictability. That raw, unfiltered struggle gave the show its unique authenticity and lasting power. Carney's late-life honesty didn't tarnish his reputation. It elevated it. Audiences came to appreciate just how much he had endured to bring Ed Norton to life. Gleason, for all his flaws, remained respected for his comedic brilliance, though fans began to see him in a more complicated light. The same genius that fueled his comedy was also the chaos that nearly destroyed those closest to him. Together, they left behind a legacy that was both triumphant and tragic. The Honeymooners remains one of the greatest sitcoms ever made, a cornerstone on which countless modern comedies were built. Yet, knowing the truth behind the laughter adds a bittersweet edge. Fans can't help but wonder. If Gleason had been easier to work with, if Carney hadn't been pushed to the edge, how much longer could the magic have lasted? That question lingers, giving new depth to a show that still makes people laugh nearly 70 years later. The legacy of Gleason and Carney is a reminder that some of the greatest art is born from the most difficult partnerships. Art Carney's confession at 76 changed how the world viewed the Honeymooners. What millions believed to be effortless comedy was, in truth, built on stress, conflict, and endurance. Jackie Gleason's brilliance created television history, But his volatility left scars on those who helped bring that vision to life. For Carney, the decision to stay brought him fame and immortality, but it also cost him years of personal struggle. And yet, when all was said and done, what endured was a body of work so timeless that audiences still laugh at it today. Perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. The same tension that nearly broke them also created comedy that will never fade.